The bus rolled through Ironwood Penitentiary's outer gates with a slow groan of something being swallowed whole. Nobody talked. Nobody moved. The prisoners inside had seen this view 100 times. The cracked yard, the rust-bitten fences, the guard tower that watched like a blind giant. But today, they were all focused on one thing. The new guy. He sat in the back of the bus, thin, quiet, hands cuffed, head lowered just enough to hide his face. No tattoos, no scars, no swagger, nothing that screamed threat or rank. He looked like someone who'd never thrown a punch in his life, which, in a place like Ironwood, meant he was already dead. The others sized him up with predatory grins. A few laughed. A few whispered ugly plans. A few placed imaginary bets. Fresh meat, one man muttered. Betty cries by tonight. Another chuckled. Nah. A third added. Betty gets home before lunch. The thin man didn't react. Not a flinch. Not a twitch. He just breathed slow, steady, like he wasn't walking into one of the worst prisons in the state. The guards unchained him last, almost forgetting he was there. He stepped off the bus with quiet footsteps, his eyes still lowered, his shoulders relaxed like he was entering a library instead of hell. Inside the intake hall, chaos boiled as usual. Men shouted across cages. Guards pushed back against the noise. Someone cursed loudly as they were dragged toward medical. The new guy, he didn't look at any of it. He walked with stillness that didn't match the room around him, like he existed a few inches outside reality. Officer Delmar flicked through the intake sheet. Name. No answer. Delmar smacked the bars. Name, inmate. The man finally raised his eyes, but not fully, just enough for Delmar to feel something cold crawl under his skin. Elias, he said quietly. Elias what? Just Elias. Delmar frowned. No last name? Elias shrugged slightly. If I had won, I've forgotten it. The inmates nearby snickered, mocking him. One shouted, Look at pretty boy. Probably stole a candy bar and fainted when cops yelled at him. More laughter. Elias lowered his gaze again, unfazed. Delmar muttered, Block C, cell 309. You're with Ruiz. The room went silent for a half second. Ruiz. Nobody wanted to be with Ruiz. He was big, built like a wall, and mean in a way that didn't need volume. He ran half of Block C with a mixture of brute force and unearned charisma. If his crew didn't like you, you'd know by lunchtime. Bad news for Elias. Ruiz heard his name from across the room and grinned, teeth sharp and predatory. That the new fish, bring him in, will welcome him properly. His boys laughed like a death sentence had been pronounced. Elias didn't look up. They marched him to Block C, a long hallway buzzing with noise, metal slams, and the thick, sour smell of sweat and ego. Inmates peered out of their cells to catch a glimpse of the newcomer. Thin, quiet, unassuming, perfect target. A few men pointed. A few whistled. A few made threats just loud enough for him to hear. Elias didn't react to any of it, not even when someone threw a rolled-up sock that hit him in the shoulder. He just kept walking, head lowered, eyes half-shaded, like he had no intention of being seen. But that was the first lie. He had every intention of being unseen. When they finally reached cell 309, Ruiz stood waiting, hands clasped behind his back, wide grin on his face. His two lieutenants, Cade and Tito, flanking him like guard dogs. Ruiz tilted his head, studying the newcomer. This it? This the mouse they send to my house? The block quieted. Everyone within earshot leaned out of their cells. Elias raised his eyes just a little. Ruiz smirked. You talk. Elias said nothing. Tito laughed. Bro, he's shy. Cade sneered. No problem. We'll break that. Ruiz stepped close, so close his breath touched Elias's cheek. Rule 1, mouse. You don't breathe unless I say. Rule 2, you don't sleep in my cell unless I check your pockets. Rule 3. Elias blinked once. Ruiz paused, thrown for a second by how calm, how empty Elias's eyes were. You listening to me? Elias nodded slowly. Yes. Ruiz grinned, pleased. Good, 'cause I run this block. Not the guards. Not the warden. Not some quiet twig like you. Elias stared quietly at Ruiz's chest, at the thick gold chain, at the tattoo of a serpent coiled around his skull. Then he whispered, "Not yet, anyway." Ruiz stiffened. "What did you say?" Elias lowered his gaze again. "Nothing." The block erupted with laughter. Ruiz shoved him roughly into the cell. "You'll learn, Mouse. You'll learn what happens when you get smart." The guards locked the door behind them. The moment the bars clanged shut, Rupert's smile changed. The performance ended. His eyes hardened. Tito closed in. "Yo, let's play with him a little." Cade nodded. Boss said break him. "Let's break him." From every direction along the tier, inmates shouted, "Light him up. Show him how Block C does it. Make him scream." Elias stood in the center of the cell, hands by his sides, head bowed. Calm. Ruiz cracked his knuckles. "You're in my house now." Elias said nothing. Tito stepped forward first, grabbing Elias by the shirt. "Say something now, Mouse." He yanked him upward, and that was the moment the entire block missed something important. Elias didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't resist. He allowed the grab. He allowed the posture. He allowed the humiliation. Not because he was weak, because he was waiting, watching, reading each man's stance, each breath, each twitch, calculating which of the 10 surrounding him would hit first, which would freeze, which would run, because this wasn't Elias's first prison, not by a long shot, just the first one he'd entered under his real face. As Ruiz and his whole crew closed in, someone from the top tier shouted, "Yo, he's cornered. This is going to be quick." The entire block leaned forward like spectators at a gladiator arena. Ruiz smirked. "Ready to cry, Mouse?" Elias slowly raised his head. Ruiz expected fear. He saw none. Instead, Elias whispered, 10. Ruiz frowned. "What?" Elias's voice stayed soft. "There are 10 of you." Dead silence. Cade scoffed. "So what?" Elias's eyes finally lifted fully, revealing a cold, unreadable depth that didn't belong to thin, quiet newcomer at all. "I'm deciding the order." The cell went still. A chill slid down Ruiz's spine, deep, primal, instinctive, like something ancient inside him recognized a predator wearing a mask. Before Ruiz could react, Elias moved. Not fast, not wild, just efficient. And in less than 3 seconds, the entire block heard the first man hit the floor. Gasps erupted across the tier. Shouts followed. Someone screamed, "Holy, he dropped Tito." Elias exhaled once. Calm, focused, done waiting. He flexed his fingers and turned toward the next attacker. And in that moment, the entire prison realized the quiet new guy wasn't prey. He was the storm. The moment Tito's body hit the concrete, the entire block sucked in a breath, so sharp it felt like the oxygen had been ripped out of the air. Nobody expected it. Nobody understood it. Nobody even saw it. 1 second, Tito had Elias by the collar. The next, his head bounced off the metal frame of the bunk with a thud that echoed through 3 tiers. But it wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It wasn't chaotic. It was precise. Too precise. Ruiz froze mid-step, one fist raised, his pupils tightening in shock. Cade's jaw dropped. What the hell was that? Elias didn't answer. He simply straightened his shirt like he'd brushed off a leaf. Then he looked at Ruiz's crew, slow, unreadable, assessing. 9 left. Cade lunged next, big arms spread wide, trying to lock Elias in a chokehold. Cade was the kind of fighter who relied on intimidation. Grab first, smash second, think third if necessary. He didn't get that far. Elias dipped under grab, twisted his hips, and rammed his elbow into the soft spot beneath Cade's ribs. Not once, twice, a third time for good measure. Cade folded over instantly, choking on his own breath. Before he could fall, Elias hooked his foot behind Cade's ankle and swept him down, guiding his head into mattress frame with a dull, controlled crack. The block erupted. "What?" "Bro, he just..." "Cade's down?" "Cade!" Roars filled the air like a stadium losing its mind. But Elias didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't even breathe hard. He just stood there, silent, calm, waiting for the next move. Ruiz's heartbeat hammered against his ribs. This wasn't luck. This wasn't adrenaline. This wasn't fluke. This was skill. Skill that didn't belong in a newcomer. Skill that didn't belong anywhere near a regular inmate. Ruiz felt a chill crawl up the back of his neck. "What are you?" he whispered. But Elias didn't respond. Benji and Marco charged together, one going high, the other going low. A combo the block had seen crush men twice Elias's size. The kind of attack that guaranteed broken ribs, broken noses, broken spirits. Elias moved like water. Marco's tackle hit nothing but air. Elias sidestepped, palm striking Marco's ear with surgical accuracy, sending him spinning into the wall. Benji swung a right hook, wild, angry, telegraphed from a mile away. Elias caught the punch. Not blocked. Caught. He twisted Benji's wrist, folded his arm backward, and dropped him with a knee to the collarbone. 3 seconds. 2 bodies down. Marco stumbled up, dizzy, dazed, confused. Elias flicked him in the throat. Not enough to kill, just enough to make him gasp and collapse. 4 down. The block exploded. Nah, no way. This dude is a weapon. Who is he? Ruiz didn't hear any of it. His focus was locked on Elias, who still hadn't taken a single step backward. He was controlling the fight without moving more than necessary, like he'd been here before. Many times. A larger inmate named Diesel, Ruiz's biggest enforcer, stepped forward, veins bulging, rage turning his face red. "You got some tricks, Twig," Diesel growled, "but let's see you handle me." Diesel rushed him like a charging bull, ready to crush Elias against the wall. But Elias didn't brace. He didn't square up. He didn't even blink. He waited. At the perfect second, he pivoted, stepped aside, and Diesel smashed into the wall, shoulder first. As Diesel bounced backward, clutching his arm, Elias tapped the side of Diesel's knee. Just a tap. Diesel collapsed, screaming, his leg refusing to hold his weight. 5 down. 6 with Marco. 7 with Cade. 8 with Tito. The block went from loud to silent in a heartbeat. Every inmate stared in disbelief, their faces stuck between awe and terror. Ruiz's throat was dry. This wasn't a fight. This was a man auditing a room. Only 2 men remained between Ruiz and Elias. Berto and Jenks, twin brothers built like refrigerators. They exchanged glances, fear creeping behind the anger. "Yo, boss," Jenks muttered. "You sure?" Ruiz didn't answer. Berto swallowed hard. We can all chill, man. No need." Elias moved. 1 step. Jenks flinched before Elias even touched him. Elias grabbed Berto's wrist, twisted, pulled him forward, and smashed his head into Jenks's. 2 skulls colliding with a hollow thud. Both brothers collapsed, arms tangled, unconscious before they hit the floor. 9 and 10. Ruiz stood alone now, surrounded by the wreckage of the men who followed him. Elias turned to face him. Slow, natural, like gravity pulling him into place. Ruiz backed up instinctively until the bars pressed into his spine. Elias approached with the quiet certainty of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "Who are you?" Ruiz whispered. Elias stopped inches away, his voice barely above a breath. "No one you ever want to see." Ruiz's hands trembled. "You're not a new guy." Elias finally lifted his head, revealing eyes that didn't belong to any inmate Ruiz had ever seen. Sharp, cold, calculating. "No." He leaned in closer. "I'm the nightmare your city whispers about." A ripple went through the block. Ruiz felt his stomach drop. "You're—" Elias nodded once. "The ghost of Raven Street." The name hit Ruiz like a sledgehammer. A legend, a myth, a face no criminal had ever seen. Until now. Ruiz's knees buckled. The entire block fell into a stunned, reverent silence. Elias stepped back, adjusting his sleeves like nothing had happened. Then he looked around the cell, voice steady, emotionless. "Now that we've introduced ourselves." He glanced at the 10 bodies on the floor. "Let's discuss who really runs Block C." Silence didn't just settle over Block C. It suffocated it. The noise of prison life. Dice rattling, steel slamming, trash talk echoing from cells. Faded into a vacuum of disbelief. The fight was over. 10 men were down. But the shock? That was just beginning. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even blinked. All eyes were on Elias. Thin, quiet, forgettable Elias. Except now he wasn't forgettable. He wasn't harmless. And he damn sure wasn't just Elias. He had spoken a name that didn't belong inside these walls. A name whispered only in alleys, in interrogation rooms, in gangs that feared their own shadows. The ghost of Raven Street. The name alone iced the air. Men who never feared anything felt something ancient crawl up their spines. Every inmate in the block, even the ones who couldn't see the fight, leaned forward in their cells like animals sensing a predator. Ruiz sank to ground, back pressed against the cold concrete, eyes wide with something he'd never felt before. Recognition. Because Ruiz wasn't stupid. He ran half this block for a reason. He knew the stories. Everyone did. Stories of a man who ran a city without ever being seen. Stories of a crime empire that never appeared on police boards because nobody had a face attached to it. Stories of a phantom figure who never raised his voice, never showed his face, never left behind evidence. The underworld had 1,000 frightening men, but only one myth. No, Ruiz whispered. No, no way. You can't be him. Elias didn't deny it. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He let the silence answer for him. And somehow, that silence was louder than any confession. The inmates on the tier snapped. Yo, that ain't possible. I heard the ghost is like 6'4". Bro, he's skinny. Ain't no way. Nah, man, you don't get IT. They say no one knows what he looks like. Some say he never leaves his house. I heard he only moves at night. I heard he killed a whole crew without firing a shot. Rumors collided with rumors. Legends twisted with myths. Superstition fused with fact. Men who had mocked him earlier now hid behind their bars, like children behind furniture during a thunderstorm. Ruiz's voice cracked. You're really the ghost? Elias finally looked at him, not with contempt, but with something colder. Indifference. Yes, he said softly. And no. Ruiz blinked. W, what does that mean? Elias's voice was quiet, but deadly in its simplicity. The ghost isn't a man. The block tensed. It's an idea, Elias continued. A shadow, a rumor, a warning. He stepped closer, making Ruiz's breath hitch. And when people fear an idea, they don't need to know the face behind it. Ruiz swallowed hard. So what are you? Elias leaned down, eyes locking onto Ruiz with a focus sharp enough to cut steel. I'm the part they couldn't see. A shudder ran through Ruiz's entire body. Suddenly the guards stormed the tier, 8 of them, hands on batons, eyes wild from the alarms. The officer in charge, Captain Mora, looked at the 10 unconscious bodies scattered around the cell and nearly dropped his radio. What happened here? No inmate answered. Not one. Some refused to look at Elias. Some stared openly, terrified. A few, very few, looked at him with something else entirely. Respect. Mora scanned the carnage. Did a riot break out? Ruiz, you better. Ruiz shook his head with panicked urgency. And no, it wasn't no riot. No riot at all. Mora frowned. Then who did this? Every eye in the block slid toward Elias. Even men who didn't want to admit the truth couldn't deny what they'd seen. Mora followed their gaze and stared at the thin newcomer, barely sweating, standing like he just walked out of church instead of a 10-man brawl. You! Mora scoffed. You did all this? Elias looked at him calmly. Yes. Mora barked a laugh. Right. Sure. And I'm the president. He turned back to Ruiz. Tell me who jumped you, or you're all getting isolation. Ruiz's mouth opened. Ruiz's mind screamed. Ruiz's soul begged him to speak the truth. But his instincts? Those screamed something else. Lie. Lie or die. His voice shook. See, Captain, it was a misunderstanding. Mora narrowed his eyes. A misunderstanding that left 10 men on the floor? Ruiz nodded rapidly. Yeah, something like that. Morris stared him down. You're protecting someone. Ruiz swallowed. No, sir. You're lying. No, sir. You want to go to solitary? Ruiz's eyes darted to Elias, standing motionless, watching, listening. Ruiz's voice cracked. No, sir. Morris sighed, annoyed. Fine. Everyone back in cells. Medical will sort these idiots out. As the guards dragged the unconscious men away, whispers rippled like electricity through the block. That's the ghost. Ain't no way. Bro, he dropped these like nothing. He didn't even flinch. Why is the real ghost in our prison? What happens now? Elias walked back to his bunk, calm as a man returning from a morning stroll. He sat down slowly, folded his hands, closed his eyes. Ruiz watched him like someone watching a loaded gun sitting on a table. Why are you here? Ruiz finally whispered, voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. Elias didn't open his eyes. I chose to be. That answer sent another chill through Ruiz. Why? He asked. This time Elias opened his eyes, and the emptiness in them felt old, heavy, dangerous. Because there's someone in this prison who thinks they're the devil. He looked directly at Ruiz. And I'm here to remind them they're not. Before Ruiz could respond, before the block could understand the meaning, someone else appeared, at the far end of the tier, a tall silhouette, standing still, watching Elias. The block went silent all over again. Ruiz whispered, trembling, Oh, hell no, is that? Elias looked up, eyes narrowing for the first time since he entered the prison, because the man standing there wasn't an inmate, wasn't a guard. He was someone else. Someone from Elias's world. Someone wearing a symbol on his sleeve only the underworld recognized. A symbol no one sane would ever display openly. A symbol that made Ruiz's heart stop. The ghost lieutenant. The second in command. And he wasn't smiling. He whispered just one sentence. Quiet, sharp, lethal, and the whole block heard it. You weren't supposed to come here. Elias stood slowly. Calm, silent, deadly. The block braced itself. Because this wasn't over. This was the beginning. The man at the end of the tier moved like a shadow made human. He was not bulky. He did not walk with swagger. He stood with the quiet assertion of someone who had never needed to shout to be obeyed. His coat hung open just enough for the faint edge of an emblem to show on the inside of his sleeve. A sigil of raven wings crossed with a dagger, thin and angular, and burned into the city's underworld like a curse. Heads turned. Even the guards paused in their work, sensing the wrongness of civilian presence in a block built to keep men apart. Ruiz tried to find his voice and failed. Roach stepped between him and the stranger as if his presence could protect a leader who'd lost his stomach to fear. The lieutenant's eyes scanned the room as if cataloging. He didn't look at the fallen man. He didn't look at the guards. He looked at Elias as if weighing an old ledger, lips barely moving. You shouldn't have come here, the lieutenant said quietly, the voice low and smooth enough to be a threat wrapped in silk. He did not cry for justice. He did not posture for control. He simply stated a fact everyone could hear. You were never meant to appear where the hero lives. Elias stood, slow as tide, the calm of the man who carries storms in his chest without letting them ripple the surface. He folded his hands behind his back and regarded the lieutenant like an old photograph one has to hold at arm's length to make sense of the shape. For a moment, something like regret flickered across Elias's face. Not the flaring, dramatic regret that villains wear, but a weary, honest thing that looked as if it had been rehearsed for years in a mirror no one else could see. You came to warn me? Elias asked. The lieutenant's nostrils flared, and a tiny smile goes to the corner of his mouth. I came to remind you of the rules you taught us. You break them. You die in a manner the council will enjoy. You brought us bones for years. Elias. You left us an instruction manual and vanished. You don't get to stroll back into the city's belly and pretend you own nothing. There was no accusation in his tone, only calculation. The line between them hummed with history. You could taste it like copper on your tongue. Marcus, who had somehow found the bottom of his courage bucket, managed to choke out, Who the hell are you? His voice rasped like a man being dragged from sleep. He tried to sound defiant, and only managed to sound smaller. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. Name doesn't matter to you. He calls me Knox. The name landed in the block like a strike. Knox. The underworld used silicon names and metal codes, but some words carried more gravity than any title. Knox meant someone who had been there when deals were cut and throats were silenced. Knox meant the kind of man who kept other men in line simply by existing. A rustle moved through the tier. Men shifted as if the air had changed texture. Jokes died on their tongues. Even the guards felt the pinprick of danger, that prick you get when you know a storm's arriving, but your umbrella is a rumor. Knox stepped closer, the emblem on his sleeve catch an emergency light, and throw it back as a blade. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need one. His presence was a weapon. He folded his hands and looked at Elias with the tired patience of someone who'd been waiting for a confession. You left us to rot, Knox said softly. You left power in their hands, in the hands of men who call themselves kings of cages. You hollered at shadows and disappeared. Some of us learned to kill in your image. Some of us learned to follow. Some of us learned to worship the echo of what you once were. Elias's eyes did not harden. They never did the theatrical thing. Instead, he closed them for a heartbeat and opened them like a man adjusting to light. I left, he said, voice low enough that only those closest heard, because what we did, what they made us do, left a child a ruined future. I couldn't be the thing that broke her. The room shifted. Even Knox's face betrayed a flicker of something otherwise forbidden, comprehension. Knox drew a breath and exhaled like a man letting down a rope. You didn't leave only for the child, he said. You left because you saw the council for what it was. A ledger. You left because you wanted to believe in a different end. But leaving doesn't erase what you built. It multiplies it. It became legend, then myth, then a weapon for others. You are not gone from the ledger. You are a line it never erased. Ruiz tried to interrupt, to plead for mercy, to bargain for the men still breathing on the floor. Please, he said, voice trembling. Please, we didn't. Knox turned his head barely. His eyes found Ruiz as if he were a curious insect. You mocked the man who once made you kneel in the street. Knox said quietly. So you learned to mock him in the cell. You are not important. Do not pretend you are. If you want to live, you stop pretending. The message was simple and brutal. The city they left outside these walls had a code, and they had offended the wrong ghost. Elias straightened. His shoulders, thin as they were, carried something much heavier than muscle, a decision. For months, perhaps years, he had let the myth overshadow his days. He had come to prison under a name he'd chosen, the face he allowed them to see, to watch what a world of men does when they think they can own silence. He watched how laughter turned to violence like a match in gasoline. He watched 10 men learn their error. He watched the lieutenant arrive and remind him that ghosts have families, loyalties, and rules as iron as the prison bars. You could leave, Knox said at last. We can take you out tonight. We can erase this memory. The council has ways of cleaning what should remain hidden. Elias met his gaze with something like a sad smile. If I go, he said quietly, I die in a cage of politics and blood you'll celebrate. If I stay, I make them remember a face. I make them remember a cost. Knox's eyes narrowed. You think you can change it from inside? Elias looked at the fallen men, littering the concrete like wreckage. I don't think. I know. For the first time since the ghost name had been spoken, someone in Block C, someone inside the city's belly, heard it as a vow rather than a myth. Knox studied Elias for a long time. The lieutenant was an instrument of the council. He had orders, and he had mercy measured in currency. He had the right to take Elias away and to burn the cell and the floor and the men, incite it into a memory, so small it would never trouble the city again. Instead, Knox nodded once. Then be careful, he said, voice thin with a warning that was almost a blessing. You will not get the whole city back. You will not unmake every ledger. But if you want to face to haunt them, if you want to be the reckoning, don't make a revenge of petty men. Make it surgical. Make it final. Make it clean. Elias's response was a whisper, a promise, and a verdict wrapped into one. I know how to be clean. Knox turned and walked back toward the shadow where he had come from. As he left, His figure passed the guards like a ship passing a pier. They noticed him and did not notice him at the same time. They had been taught to see threats in muscle and sound, not in the quiet sweep of someone who belonged to the old language of execution. When the lieutenant's shadow melted into the corridor's half-light, the block felt different, smaller, somehow, and yet at the same time the world beyond the walls seemed to tilt like an old map being redrawn. Ruiz lay back against the wall and pressed a hand over his mouth, the taste of fear metallic and real. "Who are you?" he asked again, moored himself into the wound in the room. Elias closed his eyes briefly and then opened them as if finding the next page of plan. "Something they'll remember," he said, "and something they'll wish they'd never mocked." Ironwood Penitentiary did not return to normal the next day, not even close. Whispers slithered to the tiers like smoke escaping a burning room. Guards patrolled with jittery eyes. Inmates watched corners instead of each other. The air itself felt thinner, like the entire prison was breathing cautiously around one man. Elias. He sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on knees, hands clasped loosely, like a student waiting for class to begin. His posture was calm. Too calm. It was the kind of stillness that made people's instincts scream. Men avoided walking in front of the cell. Others peeked once, then snapped their eyes away as if looking too long invited something dangerous. One inmate muttered, "He ain't supposed to exist." Another corrected, "He ain't supposed to be here." The ghost of Raven Street in a jumpsuit, sitting on a prison bed like an ordinary inmate? It didn't make sense. Legends belong in stories, not in concrete rooms with fluorescent lights. But that was the problem with legends. Sometimes they walk in. Ruiz wasn't the same. He had been king of Block C for 3 years. He had thrown men off bunks, run contraband, controlled food lines, used fear like a paycheck. Now, he sat on his bunk, shaking slightly, eyes darting every time someone walked past. Every sound made him flinch. Even the opening of his own cell door made him jolt like a startled dog. Roach and Ledger hovered near him, whispering rapidly. "Boss, listen, we gotta do something, right? I mean, we can't just..." Ruiz whispered back, voice dry and paper-thin. "We're done." Ledger blinked. "What? Done what?" Ruiz stared straight ahead. "We don't run this block anymore. Not today. Not ever again." Roach hesitated. "Him." Ruiz swallowed hard. "Him." He rubbed his face with both palms. You ever see a man drop 10 dudes without breaking sweat? You ever see a lieutenant, the lieutenant, walk into a max prison just to talk to someone? Bro, that ain't a man. That a myth that bleeds. Roach's voice cracked. "So what do we do now?" Ruiz didn't look at him. "Stay out of his way. Breathe quiet. Hope he never says our names again." Elsewhere in Yard C, the daily routines dragged on, but everything felt off. Basketball games played in silence. Work crews moved in tight, nervous clusters. The kitchen line stretched quietly, every man glancing around like a predator might step out from behind the ice machine. Everyone had seen the fight. Everyone had heard the whispers. Everyone understood one thing. Elias wasn't locked in here with them. They were locked in here with him. Even the guards acted different. Captain Moore walked past cell 309 3 times that morning, pretending to inspect something else, but glancing in Elias's direction each time. He'd been in law enforcement for 20 years and had never seen 10 grown men put down that fast without a weapon or a single drop of blood. He cleared his throat. "Cole." Elias lifted his eyes. Moore's voice softened. "You can, request protective custody if you feel unsafe." The block went dead silent. Ruiz, listening from inside his cell, almost choked. Elias blinked once. "Protective custody. For me." Moore nodded. "You were attacked. Protocol says..." Elias interrupted gently. "I wasn't attacked." Moore frowned. What you call that?" "I call it greeting." A few inmates heard that and backed up instantly. Moore inhaled deeply. "You're not going to tell me who those men were?" Elias shook his head. "They were no one." Moore hesitated. "And the man who visited you last night? The one wearing the coat? With the symbol?" Elias leaned back against the wall. "Captain, Asking questions is dangerous. For me, Morris scoffed. Elias looked at him with quiet pity. For your family. That sentence made Mora freeze. Elias wasn't threatening him. He was warning him. A warning from a man who had nothing to gain. Mora turned stiffly and walked away. He didn't inspect anything else for the rest of the morning. Lunch was worse. The cafeteria was a powder keg with a silent fuse. Normally, Ruiz's crew controlled the tables. Normally, they commanded space. Normally, they ate first and laughed loudest. Not today. Today, they chose a table at the far end of the room. Not the dominant table. Not the center. One near a wall, like prey hiding from shadows. When Elias entered the cafeteria, carrying a tray of bland prison food, the room shifted. Not loud, not dramatic. Just everything moved. Men cleared tables. Others stepped aside. Some lowered their heads. A few guards watched carefully, but didn't intervene. Elias walked through the aisle like someone who didn't notice any of it. But everyone noticed him. He took a seat, alone, at a table most gangs considered unlucky. He ate quietly, one bite at a time, expression unreadable. 10 tables away, Ruiz whispered fiercely, "Don't look at him." Roach, shaking, nodded. I ain't looking. I ain't even thinking about looking." Ledger, however, he looked, just a peek. Elias didn't look up, but Ledger swore Elias sensed a stare, like clouds sense a storm coming before lightning hits. Ledger spun back around so fast he almost fell off the bench. Ruiz clamped a hand over his arm. "Ledger, you stare at him again. I'm burying you myself." Then something strange happened. A man approached Elias's table. Tall, scarred, muscular. A man with a reputation. Durrell Ironjaw Jackson. A man who broke another inmate's ribs for taking an extra biscuit. A man who bent a bunk frame with his bare hands once. He walked toward Elias slowly, every step tense, every breath measured. The entire cafeteria stopped chewing. Durrell reached Elias's table and placed something in front of him. A small strip of cloth. Black, simple, folded once. Every inmate recognized it. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't money. It wasn't a threat. It was an offering, a gesture, a pledge. Durrell bowed his head slightly, not low, but enough to show recognition between wolves. Then he said one sentence softly. "I knew your father." Elias's fork froze. His jaw tightened a fraction, and the whole prison felt the shift. Ruiz muttered, shaking, "What the hell?" Elias's father? Who was his father? Elias didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't breathe for a heartbeat. Then he whispered, "Leave it." Durrell nodded once and walked away. The cafeteria erupted in electric whispers. The ghost had a father? Durrell knew him? Bro, what kind of bloodline is this? Who was this dude before the ghost? For the first time since he entered the prison, Elias wasn't just feared. He was being recognized. And that recognition shook the entire underworld. Because the ghost of Raven Street wasn't born. He was built, and someone out there helped build him. Someone powerful enough that hardened criminals bowed at the mention. Someone whose name had vanished from the world, but was about to come crashing back. The strip of cloth Durrell left on Elias's tray became a rumor faster than gossip at a wake. Men who'd spent years hoarding scraps of information for power passed the story like contraband in a blind corner. Careful, hushed, reverent. The cloth itself said nothing, but the way Durrell offered it said everything. Recognition, respect, debt paid, a line drawn under a long account. In a place where gestures counted more than promises. That single fold of black thread altered the ledger. That evening. The block didn't sleep so much as hold its breath. Conversations moved in small, chopped pieces. Names whispered, passed finger like old photographs. Eyes darting to cell 309, as if expecting a face to shift and flicker like a shadow on a wall. The guard pretended not to notice. But they did. Even Captain Mora walked with a different gait, like a man carrying a new worry in his bones. Elias sat alone on his bunk and unfolded the cloth with deliberate slowness. It was rough wool, the kind worn by men who'd never learned to show softness. There were no designs, no marks, only the smell of smoke and tobacco and old metal. He ran a thumb along the hem and closed his hand around it, feeling the small weight of something that tethered him to a past he preferred to keep buried. Durrell's appearance that morning had been more than respect. They were signals in a language the block understood. The ghost did not accept offerings. The ghost did not let men kneel. Yet Durrell had knelt in his way, one tough man acknowledging another. That meant bloodlines. That meant debts. That meant a father. Elias kept the cloth. He slept with it folded under his pillow like a talisman, but didn't tell anyone. Rumors swelled and warped into possibilities. The ghost father was a warlord, a crooked cop, a civil servant turned king. The ghost father had been murdered, and Elias took the mantle. The ghost father was alive and in hiding, guiding shadow play from someplace the state couldn't touch. The truth throbbed like an open wound, close, pulsing, private. 2 nights later, a whisper moved through the block that had nothing to do with Elias himself. It was quieter, older, and it carried a weight like an old ledger being opened by a trembling hand. "You remember the night of the pier?" Someone muttered. "The one with the blue boat?" Another voice answered low. "Nobody mentions a pier." The names rearranged like chess pieces. Marlowe, Finch, a list of men who had vanished or been found with impossible wounds. Men who had built the city's underbelly and then disappeared from the record. Ruiz overheard the murmurs and felt his stomach tighten. He tried to make sense of a lineage he may have brushed against in rumor, but never touched in truth. He remembered a story his uncle used to tell about a man who ran a city without a face, who ordered silence and received it. The story had been bedtime for desperate children, but now that a supposed chapter had sat on a bunk in Block C, it tasted like real danger. That night, Durrell returned. He didn't come in with the swagger of a bully or the bounce of a man who owned petty power. He walked like a man carrying memory. He paused beneath the dim light, fingers laced behind his back, and locked eyes with Elias. The 2 men said nothing at first. A silence like church filled the cell. "I knew your father," Durrell said finally, voice low and careful as he sat on the edge of the opposite bunk. "Not in the way men know other men. In the way sons know their fathers in stories. They don't meet them. They meet a shadow you follow." Elias's hands tightened on the cloth. "What was his name?" he asked. Durrell's jaw ticked. He swallowed. "People called him Rook." The syllable fell into the cell like a stone into deep water. Rook. The underworld used bird names for the smart ones. Crow, rook, raven. It made sense. A bird that watches and waits and pecks what it needs to survive. Elias's breath hitched in the barest fraction. "Rook was a cleaner," Durrell said. "Not the kind that wipes tables. He cleaned ledger lines. He made problems disappear in ways no one traced back. He kept the map tidy. He taught men to be invisible and lethal." Durrell let the last word hang like a verdict. Elias didn't speak immediately. He let the memory breathe before answering. "He taught me how to be unseen," Elias said quietly. "He taught me how to make a city obey without ever entering a room." "Then why be here?" Durrell asked. His voice wasn't all curiosity. There was accusation in it, the kind built for men who kept accounts. "You left the map hole when you vanished. The council used the space you left to grow their ledger. They turned your ghosts into monsters that don't listen." Elias's face pinched with something almost like pain. "Because he made me promise." Durrell's brow raised. "Promise?" Elias nodded. "He told me the only way we stopped the ledger was by turning its pages into proof. Find the names. Make them accountable. But I couldn't," he paused. "There was a girl. I couldn't look at her and do what they asked." Durrell's eyes clouded. "You mean the story? The child on the pier?" Elias's hands tightened so hard the cloth creased. "She had her father's hands in her pocket when I saw her. She asked if men like me were the good guys. I couldn't lie. I couldn't do it." Durrell's jaw worked. "So you left." "And in leaving," Elias continued, "I left them a template. I left them a ghost. They dressed it in fear and taught men to worship it." Durrell's shoulders sagged. "And the council? They didn't forget. They wrote a new ledger." "They did," Elias said simply. "They did what men in power always do. They recycled the myth into control." Silence pressed down on the two men. It hummed with consequence. Durrell leaned forward, the man's massive frame folding like a chair closing. If Rook were alive, would he help you? Would he come for the ledger? Elias's eyes were distant. Rook is in pieces, he said. Pieces in jars, pieces in paperwork. Pieces in men who no longer remember why they obey. He taught me how to be a ghost. He didn't teach me how to unmake being a ghost. Durrell's fingers curled into the thin cloth. Then why did you come into the prison? Why take the risk? Elias closed his eyes for a long breath. Because hiding doesn't stop the ledger. It grows. Men suffer because they think silence is safety. I wanted to see if a face would change the balance. Durrell's laugh was bitter and small. You thought a face would do that? In a cage full of men who trade names like currency. I thought a face might remind them they were dealing with a man, Elias said. Not an idea. And what if the council sends men? Durrell asked, voice low as a blade. And they don't bring the ledger. What if they bring fire? What then? Elias looked at him like a man seeing the map of his life unfold in a bruise of light. Then we burn the ledger and teach the city to write a new one. Durrell's expression hardened. He leaned closer until his voice dropped to a whisper only Elias could hear. If Rook taught you how to disappear, he taught someone else how to hunt ghosts. Be careful, boy. The council keeps hunters. Hunters that don't mind where they end a match. They use prisons like cages and then watch what's inside. A weight settled in Elias's chest the way a winter settles on bare ground. Slow, cruel, unavoidable. The truth soaked into him. He was not just a man back from myth. He was bait. He was a spark on a floor soaked in old oil. A single misstep, and the whole place would ignite. Ironwood felt wrong the next morning. Not dangerous. Not violent. Wrong. Like someone had tilted the entire prison by a few degrees, and nobody could stand straight anymore. The air felt heavier. Sound sharper. Shadows longer. Even the guards walked differently. Like men who had been told quietly that something was coming, and it didn't care about badges. Elias noticed it instantly, not because he was paranoid, but because he'd felt this air before, more than once. It was the same air that filled a room when hunters were already inside it. He sat on his bunk, elbows on knees, and listened, truly listened, not to the inmates arguing 2 cells down, not to the footsteps above, but to the faint, mechanical rhythm beneath the usual sounds. Most men would overlook it, mistake it for pipes or vents or old wiring. Elias heard it for what it was. Boots, soft, synchronized, moving in patterns only trained men used. Hunters, not guards, not gang members, not the riffraff who thought violence was a personality. These men moved like whispers. Elias's jaw tightened. The council had sent their dogs. In the yard, inmates felt the shift before they could explain it. A basketball game stopped mid-pass. A weightlifter froze with the bar halfway up. Conversations dropped off like someone turned down the volume. Even Ruiz, who normally strutted like a rooster, hugged the fence, eyes darting nervously. You feel that? Roach whispered. Ledger nodded. Feels like the block's watching us. Ruiz muttered, voice shaking. Not the block. Someone else. Someone who didn't belong. Someone who didn't care what they broke. Elias walked into the yard quietly. He didn't change his pace. Didn't look around. Didn't show fear. But every inmate felt a shift, like gravity pulling inward. Men moved out his path without thinking. Some stepped back 2, 3 paces. A few dropped their eyes out of instinct. Elias stopped near the center and scanned the yard once. Just once. To anyone watching, it looked casual. To Knox's trained eye, it would have been obvious. Elias had just mapped every threat, every blind spot, every angle of escape, every approach route, all in a single glance. And then he turned his attention to the one person who was foolish, or brave, enough to approach him. Durrell. He walked toward Elias with slow, deliberate steps, brow creased with worry instead of hostility. You feel it? Durrell muttered quietly. Elias nodded. Durrell's throat bobbed. Council sent hunters, didn't they? No, Elias said. Not hunters. Durrell stiffened. Then who? Elias's voice dipped low. Purge men. Durrell's blood went cold. No. No way. They don't send purge teams unless the ledger says. They think I'm a loose end, Elias finished. Durrell gripped the fence. Those men don't come to arrest. They don't come to deliver a message. They come to erase. Elias didn't respond because he didn't need to. The footsteps on the floor said enough. Inside the control tower, Captain Morris stared at the monitors, confused and sweating. Why the hell are there blind spots in the east hallway? And who authorized the patrol shift? No one answered. 2 guards continued watching the screens with empty eyes. Too calm, too controlled. It took Moore a full 10 seconds to realize those weren't his men at all. Their posture was wrong. Their shoulders too relaxed. Their eyes too flat. Who are you? Moore demanded. One of them turned his head slightly. Enough for Moore to catch the faint symbol burn behind the man's ear. A small, sharp marking. A council burn. A purge mark. Moore's blood froze. You! This isn't authorized. Step away from those. He didn't finish. The purge man turned and struck him with the heel of his palm, a blow so precise it shut Moore's body down before he hit the floor. They stepped over him like he was dust. Back in the yard, Elias shifted his weight slightly. It was the smallest movement, but it made Durrell flinch. They're inside already, Elias murmured. Durrell clenched his fists. They'll come here. They always start with whoever the ledger marks as. Priority, Elias finished. Ruiz overheard part of it and nearly stumbled backward. Priority? Bro, who the hell marks a man as priority? Elias didn't turn. The same people who built the city's bones. The yard fell silent around him. And then a loud metallic click echoed across the fence. One of the gates secured during normal operations unlocked itself. Not from the guard station. Not from a key. Remotely, Ruiz whispered. Who the hell can open a yard gate without guards? Elias answered without emotion. Purge men. The gate swung open just enough for 3 silhouettes to step inside. Not big, not bulky, not dramatic. They didn't need to be. Their presence felt like winter entering a warm room, quiet, cold, unstoppable. They scanned the yard once. Only once. Then their eyes landed on Elias. A guard ran out screaming. Yard C. Everyone inside. Move. Move. But the purge men didn't even look at him. They walked forward at a steady, chilling pace. The yard cleared in seconds. Inmates backed against fences, into corners, into shadows, anywhere to avoid being between them and the ghost. Durrell grabbed Elias's arm. We gotta move. They'll corner you out here. Elias shook his head gently. Running won't help. Why not? Elias finally looked at him. Because purge men don't chase. Durrell froze. Then what do? They collect. Ruiz shivered so hard he dropped to his knees. Oh God, oh God. The purge men reached the center of the yard and stopped. They stood perfectly still, hand behind their backs, faces unreadable, like statues carved out of frost. Then the one in front spoke. Asset Elias. You were instructed never to re-enter council territory. Elias didn't move. Ruiz whispered. Asset? They call him Asset. The purge man continued, voice even. You are marked for extraction or termination. Compliance with the term and category. Durrell's breath hitched. This is insane. They're going to kill you in here. In front of everyone. Like you're a check mark on a list. Elias stepped forward. Calm. Measured. Prepared. No. The purge man's eyes narrowed. No what? No. Elias said, You won't kill me. Explain. Elias looked him dead in the eyes. Because your ledger doesn't allow you to kill the son of the man who built it. The yard gasped. Ruiz clapped a hand over his mouth. Durrell whispered. He just invoked Rook's name. The purge man's jaw tightened barely. Your father no longer protects you, he said softly. Elias smiled faintly. No, he replied, but his secrets do. The purge man's posture changed. Just slightly. But Elias saw it. Everyone saw it. Durrell muttered. What secrets? What could be worse than the ghost? The purge man's voice dropped. What do you know? Elias stepped closer, eyes cold enough to freeze blood, enough to collapse the council. The yard held its breath. The purge men locked eyes with one another, calculating, reassessing, rewriting objectives. And for the first time since entering, the lead purge man's voice cracked, not with fear, but with recognition. You are not marked priority. He paused. You are marked classified. Ruiz whispered, What the hell is classified? The purge man answered, The kind of threat we don't kill. He stepped back. The kind of threat we retrieve. Two purge men moved to flank Elias. Durrell lunged forward. No, you can't just... Elias held up a hand. Stop. Durrell froze instantly. Elias sighed once, like a man accepting a weight he knew too well. Then he whispered, I knew they'd come. The purge men reached for him, and Elias let them, because this wasn't capture. This was phase 2. They called it extraction like it was a polite errand. 3 men in winter coats, moving through the clipped geometry of the yard with a bureaucracy's patience. The phrase extraction order sounded sterile through the prison intercom, a bureaucratic mouthpiece trying to cover the violence it hid. Captain Mora heard it and felt it like ice through bone. Someone with power had decided Elias was no longer to be left to chance. Men whispered like a prayer or a curse. Extraction, retrieval, classified. The words ricocheted through Block C in different registers. Fear for the small, appreciation for the big, calculation for the greedy. Everyone tuned their ears to meaning. We don't fight an extraction. Durrell hissed into Elias's collar like advice from a man who knew the price of a wrong move. We let it happen and pray the ledger takes mercy. Elias smiled, but was flat, a soldier's smile at the end of an impossible march. Mercy isn't what I expect, he said. The purge men moved with practiced calm. One of them, clean-shaven, lips thin, held a small laminated card the size of a library tag. It read, in plain bureaucrat font, Council, Retrieval Team, High Priority, Code, Classified. The card was small and absurd against the backdrop of boots and barbed wire, but the thing it represented was larger than any paper. Captain Morris stepped forward, illegally close to protocol, because a man's instincts sometimes outrun his badge. You can't just walk in here, and he started. A purge man folded the card like a secret and handed it to him. Mora read it once, and his face registered the interior tilt of whatever world had authored the card. He folded away his authority, like a man putting down fragile glass. Escort protocol, he muttered, voice small. Ruiz had sunk to the floor like a felled tree. He watched everything with the keen terror of someone awaiting their own obituary. Roach and Ledger stood near him, hands white-knuckled on the rail. Even the guards who had been neutral, until now hovered like unmoored buoys, unsure where the current would pull them. The lead purge man paused at Elias's cell. He didn't move with the theatricality of a movie captor. He moved like a clerk asking for a signature. He looked at Elias, and for the first time since Leonard's silence, his expression showed, if not humility, then a small, bordered regret. As said Elias Cole, the man said, speaking the name like a label on a crate, under council directive, you're a designated classified retrieval. We have orders to take you to secure transport. Elias watched him, face unreadable. People expected fear when words like council and classified drifted into prison. They expected pleading, bargaining, violence. Elias offered none of it. He stood and folded his hands behind his back as if he'd been waiting at a train station. Do it, Elias said. Captain Mora's jaw worked. He moved on instinct, toward procedure, toward protection, asking questions he'd never thought to ask before. Under whose authority? What about due process? The purge man's voice was flat. The council waives local procedure for classified retrievals. We have clearance. The word clearance snapped across the yard like a flag. Guards stepped back. The atmosphere shifted, a collective retreat into small, private safety. Durrell stepped forward and slapped a hand on Elias's shoulder. You don't have to go, he said without bravado. We can make a plan. We can smuggle you. Elias's hand covered Durrell's with the gentleness of a man holding a child's wrist. "You offered a cloth," he said softly, "not a barricade." Durrell's throat bobbed. He swallowed and stepped back as if someone had slapped him with cold water. No one else moved. Nothing bold happened. Nobody dared to be the small man who tried to stop what the ledger sanctioned. The purge men unlocked the cell with keys they produced with the unspectacular efficiency of people used to doors opening for reasons not explained to others. The sound of metal against metal felt like a verdict. Elias walked out slowly, filling the narrow corridor with presence that had already rewritten it. Men watched him go, some begrudging, some grateful, most afraid. He did not look back. He never looked back. That was the rule of ghosts. You never stand in the place that made you myth. The lead purge man led him across the yard to a waiting van hidden under a tangle of shadows. It was a plain vehicle, no insignia, no pomp, exactly the kind of blandness that hides intent. A pair of black-clad men opened the back doors with practiced silence. Captain Mora approached, hand outstretched in a gesture that meant nothing official, but everything personal. He touched Elias's sleeve, a small, awkward human act. "If you get any chance," Mora began. Elias didn't turn his head. He nodded once, curt, almost contemptuous of pity. "I won't beg," he said. "I won't vanish again." That sentence landed in Mora like a stone thrown through glass. The captain stepped back and let the men lead Elias into the van. The doors closed with a quiet finality. As the van drove away across the compound, the yard drained of color. Men stared after it for minutes like they had watched a body pass by in a funeral procession. The rumor of extraction became another document written into the ledger block C. One more fact that would be noted, copied, whispered, and then weaponized. Inside the van, the air smelled like metal and disinfectant. The men who had led the extraction sat across from Elias, like ushers in a church that dealt with severed things. They were efficient men, with hands that held ropes and tapes and secrets, with faces that showed the exhaustion of those paid to remove questions rather than answer them. One of them, thin and sallow, finally spoke past the hum of the engine. "Asset, you should know. Council orders are strict. You will be debriefed. Cooperation is recommended." Elias looked at him as if assessing the taste of a stale fruit. "You're used to telling people what to do," he said, "and they're used to obeying you." The thin man's eyes flicked. "You were a commander." Elias's jaw tightened. "Once." "And now," the man pressed. Elias's eyes found a back window where the prison towers shrank into a grid of rectangles and tiny men moving like ants. "Now," he said quietly, "I have a face and a list. Faces are dangerous. So are lists." The man inhaled, the smallest sign of unease flickering across his weathered skin. "The council doesn't like dangerous lists," he said low. "They prefer tidy files." Elias blew out a breath. "Then let them tidy. They'll find pages missing." The van rolled on. Outside, Ironwood returned to a kind of brittle normal. Guards checked forms. Men who had been bold the day before swallowed humor. Ruiz folded himself into smaller shapes to avoid the looks of other men who now measured him with pity and contempt. But the ledger had changed. A name had been spoken. A face had been seen. The council had stepped into the prison's light and reached for the man who had once haunted their nights. If extraction was a removal, it was also an admission. The ledger feared what a living ghost could do when it opened its mouth. And in the van, with the city's gray skyline crawling past the windows like a map of bones, Elias Cole sat straight, palms flat on his knees, and thought in the quiet way of a man making a plan that would make the world burn only where it deserved to burn. Because extraction wasn't the end of the ledger. It was the start of the ledger's reckoning. Part 9, the council's table. The van reached the city before dawn, the hour when streetlights flickered, when newspapers hit doorsteps, when honest people slept and dishonest men made decisions that shaped the day. But the place the van was headed wasn't on any map. It hid under a courthouse, behind a police precinct, under layers of respectable architecture meant to disguise rot. They called it the Below, the council's real headquarters. A purge man tapped a coded sequence on an unmarked black door. Bolt slid. Metal groaned. Lights flickered on one by one, pale and sterile. This was not a prison. This was a workshop. A chamber for decisions that never reached legal records. The kind of place where names went in and never came out. Elias stepped into a hallway with walls too clean, too white, too controlled, like a hospital designed by men who never cared about healing. The lead purge man spoke. Asset Cole, follow. Elias didn't move quickly or slowly. He walked like someone who'd already been here 100 times in nightmares. They led him to a room with a circular metal table, 6 chairs bolted to the floor, and a single strip of light cutting down like a blade. Inside were 4 people. Not soldiers, not gangsters, not politicians. The council, the people who ran the city's underworld through contracts, blackmail, and silent favors. People who never touched guns because they owned the men who carried them. A woman with iron gray hair and a pen made of real gold looked up first. Elias, she said softly, you look thinner than the reports suggested. Reports, of course. The man beside her, tall and bone-thin, adjusted his glasses. We never expected you to walk back onto the board. Another man cracked his knuckles. Thought you were dead. Elias pulled out the remaining folded cloth, the one tied to his father, and placed it on the table. Their eyes sharpened instantly. The woman stiffened. Rook's mark. She didn't touch it. None of them did. It was superstition, but also fear. Elias spoke for the first time since entering. You sent purge men into a prison. That means you're desperate. The thin man leaned forward. We don't fear you, Elias. Elias raised a brow. Then why 3 purge men? Why the van? Why the classified order? Silence. A dangerous silence. The gray-haired woman exhaled softly. Because you hold something that shouldn't exist anymore. Elias said nothing. The 3rd councilman, short, heavy-set, scar on his cheek, spoke like a man chewing gravel. You think we care that you beat 10 inmates? That you walked into Ironwood and made everyone piss themselves? He leaned forward. We don't. Elias met his stare. The man continued. What we care about are the pages. Durrell's words echoed in Elias's mind. Rook taught someone to hunt ghosts. Rook left pieces all over the city. Elias's voice stayed calm. Which pages? The gray-haired woman tapped her nails on the metal table. Each tapped a punctuation mark. The ones your father wrote. Elias kept his face still. But internally, a knife turned. Rook wasn't just a cleaner. Wasn't just a shadow. He kept records. Real ones. Not myths. Not rumors. Names. Deals. Crimes. Payments. Secrets. The ledger behind the legend. The tall man with glasses said, Those pages can collapse the council. Elias corrected him softly. No, they can collapse the entire city. The council stared at him. He didn't flinch. The short man spoke again. You stole those pages before you vanished. Don't deny it. Elias remained silent. Where are they? The man demanded. Elias raised his head slightly. Safe. Safe, he hissed. Safe where? Elias's voice dipped to a whisper that still managed to cut through the room. Safe from all of you. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was a smile of someone who'd cornered a wolf but forgotten that wolves bite. You misunderstand. Elias, we didn't bring you here to negotiate. The door behind him slid shut. A lock clicked. A hum filled the room, faint but mechanical. Durrell had warned him. If the council can't convert a ghost, they erase it. The gray-haired woman folded her hands. We brought you here because we can't risk you being outside our control. The tall man added, and your father's pages won't protect you forever. The scarred man cracked his knuckles again. We will find them, with or without you. Elias leaned back in the metal chair, steady, unreadable. You won't, he said. Why not? The woman asked. Because you don't know what you're searching for. The man with glasses scoffed. Pages. Ledgers. Records. No, Elias said softly. Not pages. He let the sentence breathe. People. The room froze. What people? The woman demanded. Elias finally revealed the truth. My father didn't hide the evidence in paper, he said. He hid it in the heads of the people you never bothered to look at. Silence. Elias continued. Every name in a ledger he gave to a witness, a courier, a forgotten man, a girl, a janitor, a nurse, a ghost of their own. The scarred man's face drained of color. Elias's voice darkened. You want the ledger? He leaned forward. Then you have to kill half the city. The woman slammed her palm on the table. You're lying. Elias didn't blink. Am I? The purge men outside shifted their stance. Even they sensed the tension. Elias lowered his voice to a whisper. I didn't come here to give you the ledger. The council stiffened. I came here to burn it. The gray-haired woman's eyes widened. And then the lights went out. Total darkness. A scream. A crash. A gunshot. A metallic clang. The room exploded into chaos. Elias didn't move. He'd been waiting for this. A shadow slammed against the wall. A body hit the floor. Someone shouted, Security! A small, sharp voice whispered behind Elias. You took too long. Elias didn't need to turn. He knew who it was. The girl from the pier. Now grown. Now dangerous. Now something the council never saw coming. She murmured, Ready to finish what your father started? Elias exhaled once. Yes. The final fall and the hard twist. They called it midnight, but in the below time was a dishonest thing. It moved in fragments, decisions, breaths, the clicking of locks, until the hour lost any meaning, and everything else took shape around a single act. Elias had never imagined ceremony would feel so small. The council's table sat ruined beneath scattered papers and a smear of coffee that looked like a brown star. The purge men were gone, either extracted, dead, or run into some new ledger, and the 4 chairs at the center were empty but for the ring of evidence Elias, the gray-haired woman, the scar man, and the thin one had torn free into chaos. The girl from the pier stood in the doorway like a shadow, the pale light catching the knife at her hip, and the way her eyes carried nothing of the child once frightened on that dock. Elias moved slowly through the wreckage, shaking a cigarette that wasn't a cigarette from a packet he brought like a relic. He had already watched men fall silent in front of him, watched the ledger tremble under the weight of the names he'd coaxed out of city skin. He had expected the council to bargain, to plead, to throw men at him in a last clumsy attempt to save their house of cards. Instead, they'd offer the truth. The gray-haired woman, Regina, spoke with the brittle politeness of a woman who had meant to outlast everyone at the table. You burned paper, Elias. You burned our files. Her fingers trembled an inch. But you didn't burn the city. You didn't dismantle the ledger. You burned the map, not the men who read it. Elias smiled, a hairline break of humor without joy. Paper folds, he said. People do not. You taught them your language. They still speak it. The thin man, Jerome, cursed softly. We can rebuild. We always rebuild. You think you can walk out of here and the city will forget you. Elias's voice dropped to the flat. Cold edge it had worn since intake. I'm not walking out. Silence swallowed the room. The council leaned in as if the words were small lights they wanted to cup. Something in the air shifted. Expectation, calculation. The scent of final accounting. Durrell's face flashed in Elias's memory. His giant hands, the scarred thumb, the folded black cloth. The child from the pier had sat in the van, close enough that Elias could feel the small evenness of her breath. He had not yet asked her name that night. He had not yet learned how the ledger had turned a child into a weapon. Then why bring me here? Elias asked the panel. Why stage your own funeral and call a meeting? Regina's reply was a rustle. We wanted you cataloged, labeled. That way you couldn't become a symbol. We wanted to cage you under paper. We failed at that. Jerome leaned forward. We came to offer you a choice. Leave, walk into exile, or be taken and buried where no myth can grow. Elias tilted his head. And if I refuse? Regina's eyes were the color of cheap silver, and the silver didn't sit well on her. Then we end what you started, permanently. Elias nodded once, slow. Then end it. The gray-haired woman's hand struck the table. 2 men in the doorway moved like trained animals, ready to obey a simple signal. But before anyone could act, the door behind them slammed, and chaos that had been quiet in the vent screamed into the room. A flurry of movement, shouts, the scrape of boots, the metallic bark of weapons, and the girl from the pier stepped forward, breathing fast, the knife in her hand flashing in the pale light. She moved like someone who'd rehearsed 1,000 endings and never needed to act out any of them. Why? Regina demanded. Fury paper cut thin. The girl's eyes bored into Elias for half a heartbeat, then flipped to the counsel. She spoke with the voice of someone who had learned to keep secrets in her lungs. You killed my mother. The room inhaled as one. Regina's face didn't change. We didn't kill anyone unnecessary, she said. You burned her name, the girl said. She slid the knife out as if testing its balance. You ordered it. Regina laughed, a sound without humor. You're a child. You speak in stories. The girl's blade dipped, slow, and the laugh stopped. My name is Mara, she said. You remember the girl on the pier now. I was 10. You called me by someone else's fear and wrote me into your ledger as a footnote. My mother, she had debt, she had names, she had a refusal. You made her disappear into a set of forms. I watched. Jerome's fingers went white on the armrest. You expect us to answer for a child's claim? Mara stepped closer to the table until the light washed her face and showed the hard geometry beneath. I don't expect it, she said. I know it. I had watched the file they buried, and then I found him. She nodded toward Elias. He couldn't kill her. He sat with her and listened to the last things she told him. He vowed to erase your ledger. He betrayed you because of a child's question. Elias's stare met Mara's. That's why I left. Not to save myself. To save a girl. Regina's hands were small fists. You are sentimental, she said. Sentiment collapses empires. Mara stepped around the table and placed her palm on the folded cloth Elias had set there, the rag Durrell had once offered. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered something so low only she could hear it. Then she smiled. Not the cruel smile Elias had expected. Not the bitter one he had rehearsed. A smile like a knife opening. You did this, Mara told Elias. You took the pages and distributed them like memory to people who wouldn't be found. You hid the ledger in living things. You taught witnesses to carry names in their bones. You thought that hiding it would save them. Elias's face was nearly a mask. I hid it because paper burns. People survive. Mara laughed, soft and cold. People also forget. Some people forgive too easy. And you. She straightened, and the room watched a long movement like a curtain shifting. You thought you were the one to return and fix it all. You came here in a van, and you believed you could bargain with the men who sold children and called it governance. Jerome stood. You insolent. Mara's hand moved faster than any sermon. It moved like the girl at the pier had learned to move. Precise, clinical, final. She drew a small pistol from inside of her jacket and leveled it not at a clerk, not at a man, but at Elias. The room shut down into an animal tension, teeth bared, breath held. Elias blinked once, slow. Were you? Mara's voice was the sound of ocean hitting jagged rock. I grew up with both your promises and your betrayals. You saved me from a task you would not do. You vowed to burn their papers and never kill their hands. You made me a weapon and then refused to use me. I carried the ledger for years so you wouldn't have to. I listened to the names in the dark. I kept them. I held them. You came to free them with spectacle, Elias. You came to be a face while I did the work families cannot do. Elias's jaw tightened. You can't, he said. Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. For years, she whispered, I taught myself to be merciless because mercy left my mother dead. You break men for principle. I break principles to make men stop breaking people. The pistol fired. The sound was small, mercifully clean. The bullet struck Elias in the chest. Centered, surgical, perfect, and he folded like a shadow being erased. The room convulsed in a noise that would not resolve into words for a long time. He hit the floor and did not cry out. Mara didn't flinch. She crouched down beside him as if tucking a child into bed. Her fingers lifted his face and, with a tenderness that made the counsel cringe, she brushed his hair from his forehead. Goodbye, ghost, she said. Elias's lips moved once, barely a breath against a roar of alarms. "Why?" he asked. Mara smiled in a way that could stop the ocean. "Because you gave them a face. A face is a place to hang blame. I will not let them have a man to blame while their ledger continues. You died, so names would not need your protection. I will carry the ledger forward. I will bury names in mouths and not in files." She rose and holstered the pistol. The council watched as shock and fury wore across their faces. Regina reached for a guard, white-knuckled, but the doors were already opening. Footsteps stormed in, too many, too loud. Men in black suits poured into the room, followed by uniforms that smelled of authority and legal consequences. The world was catching up, and the council found themselves in the wrong half of the ledger's page. Mara turned toward the door and paused. For 1 second, she looked at the bodies, in the room, in the prison, in the city, and something like sorrow touched her mouth. She stepped through the doorway and vanished into the night. Elias lay where he had fallen, the warmth seeping from him like water into sand. Regina knelt, trembling, and touched his hand. "You ruined us," she hissed, but the words were small and ragged. Jerome shouted at the intruders, but the sound dissolved into the chaos of arrests and accusations. The girl who had once asked if he was a good man had become the blade that cut the ledger free. Outside, the van that had carried Elias away idled at a curb. Somewhere through the city, men who had held names for decades found themselves called, questioned, subpoenaed, and forced to speak the things paper could not hide. The ledger bled even as it burned. Inside the ruined chamber, as sirens crawled closer, as men were led away in cuffs, as pages in memory fell into the light, Elias breathed his last breath. He did not die as a myth. He died as a man whose choices had cost him a life he tried to buy back for others. And the girl, Mara, walked into the dark with the ledger folded in her arms like a newborn and a pistol at her side like a promise. The twist was not that the ghost survived. The twist was that the child he had saved became the new keeper of the ledger, and she would never let the city call the fall a mercy. She would make it the reckoning.